Did we check the phone? Welcome, welcome, welcome. You are listening to, you are watching, you are witnessing Humanity in the Headlines. I am your host, Atiba Buchanan. I am joined and flanked, accompanied by, if you will, my good friend and confidant, my pal, my guy, my homie, no, I ain't gonna say it.
So say you was running out the
right?
synonyms in a minute.
My man of what, 30 years now, Mr. David Seaton. I met this man in 8H, but go ahead, bro.
What's going on, man?
Hey, how you doing? That was a little shout out to, Little Roosevelt. It's gone.
Roosevelt Junior High out there.
Yes.
It's Thurgood Marshall now, right?
Thurgood Marshall now.
That's deep. That's cool though.
But it's still there. So
right.
Much love, shout out to Mr. Patch. No, I'm just kidding. So as you can tell, I'm in good spirits this week, man. First of all, I'm just glad to be here. Second of all, I'm glad the weather seems to finally be breaking. I got 5 slabs of ribs in my deep freezer. It's taking up too much space and it's time to cook, but I cannot cook ribs in less than 60 degrees.
Well, all you need is a couple of days.
Right.
It's supposed to warm up.
Yes, exactly. So good to see you, bro. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today.
Not at all.
To join me in this mission, in this endeavor, to inform the people, to entertain the people, to enlighten the people, and to share with the people, and to fight for the people. So that's what we are here to do today on Humanity and the Headlines. We have a lot for you guys. First off, we're definitely going to talk about the guilty verdict for Mr. Bill Cosby. We have a great guest for that. Attorney Victor Henderson will be joining us for that conversation later today. We're going to talk about Joy Reid, someone that I admire greatly, who's had a misstep and has had a lot of negative press the past few days. But I think it does, as always, these type of situations lend itself to open it up to a broader conversation. And we'll try to have one of those today concerning Joy Reid. If you're not aware of some of the homophobic comments that she's made in her past that have kind of come back to bite her, and she's catching a lot of heat for that. So we're going to talk about that later in the show today. And we're also going to talk about something that's, I know, near and dear to David's heart. It was actually his suggestion today, and I thought it was just a fabulous idea. But we're going to talk about Black representation in media, and not just media, but more specifically in Hollywood. The images that we continually see, the limited images that we see, and the effects that it has on us as a society. So we're going to talk about what is this? Tracy Morgan's new show.
Tracy Morgan's new show with Tiffany Haddish.
Yeah, which I know is going to be funny though. But go ahead.
I'm not a big fan of his at all.
Yeah,
only time I really liked him was when he played Hustle Man on Martin.
Right. Yeah, he's he's funny to me, and she is hilarious. So I think, and then Cedric the Entertainer's on it, but again, to your larger point, he is someone in this series, because it's not a movie, it's actually a series,
right? That
is he's an ex-con, he's out of jail,
out of jail for 15
years, right, trying to get his life back together. Which there is room for that conversation, because that is a specifically Black kind of dynamic, because a white guy going to jail for 15 years, his story isn't a whole lot different from a white guy that doesn't go to jail, because their life is not largely impacted per the statistics. What they bear out is that their lives are not nearly as impacted having been in jail as someone who is a minority. So again, while there's room for that, there's also so much more to the Black experience that's not being covered in Hollywood.
Right.
That
we got this other movie where Kevin Hart.
Yep.
He's supposed to be this phenomenal salesperson, but he's trying to transition into more of a white professional sales position, but they tell him that he can't get the position because he doesn't have a GED.
Right.
So he's a grown man, and Tiffany Haddish is actually in that movie. Tiffany Haddish is just blowing up.
Right.
But Tiffany Haddish is in that movie, and I believe the name of the movie, the title of the movie is Night School.
Okay.
But the backdrop of the movie is successful Black guy trying to move up, but he can't because he doesn't have a GED. Which I will honestly say that in my recent experience, I've come into contact with more people who don't have a GED and don't care. But like I said, the overarching, we just came off of we're coming off the tails of this phenomenal Black movie, Black Panther, that's that's completely, it's a fantasy movie, it's a sci-fi movie, so it's not real, but that movie just raised black people and the image of black people to a whole new level, such that the movie is the number one singles, the number one superhero movie in history. But then we have these two movies come out. But I don't want to get too deep. We'll wait till we.
Absolutely. But again, these are the kind of conversations that we have, the types of things that we try to dissect here on Humanity and the Headlines. Again, we always have a lot that we try to bring to you guys. So we just thank you for joining us, everyone on Facebook Live, everyone on YouTube, and everyone on IntellectualRadio.com, which is our home here. We want to always give a shout out to Mr. Earl Winfrey. Again,
man,
for this,
myth, the legend.
Absolutely. So what we're going to do is take a quick break. When we come back, we will be joined by Attorney Victor Henderson to discuss the Bill Cosby guilty verdict. Thank you so much for listening to Humanity and the Headlines on IntellectualRadio.com. We are back on Humanity in the Headlines. So, Dave, this has certainly been the news of the week for me, because I kind of, after the initial, I think it was a mistrial, right? I kind of had not been paying as much attention to the Cosby court case as much, and I'd kind of forgotten about it, to be honest with you. And then I look up, because there wasn't a lot of fanfare or talking about this before the guilty verdict. You had not heard of like tense moments in court today. You hadn't really seen that type of coverage. You just looked up and he was guilty. And I have such split emotions about it. I mean, on the one hand, if he did do it, and I'm kind of inclined to think that he did, just based on the history, the number of victims and so forth. And even he joked about it a lot. A lot of times people kind of low key talk about things that they are actually doing. And it was like part of a stand up for a while. Where does that experience come from? So on the one hand, certainly, he deserves what he gets. He has to be held accountable for what he did. But on the other hand, when you look at it from perspective, different angles, the conspiracy theorist in me, wonders, what is really behind this. The timing of things always seems suspect. So again, I definitely have split and mixed emotions about it. That's why I'm glad we have our guest here today. If you could let our listeners.
As a criminal defense attorney, he has represented Cook County commissioners, state representatives, and even the owners of the nightclub. Those of you in Chicago will remember that had 21 deaths of their patrons. Joining us today, Attorney Victor Henderson. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Really quickly, I'm really interested, and I don't want to get too deeply, but just as an attorney, what are your initial thoughts about the guilty verdict of Bill Cosby?
The thing that strikes me, because you asked me as an attorney, I think the thing that's most interesting to me, and I know it's going to be an issue on appeal, is that the judge in this particular case, or in the retrial, allowed 5 other women who claim to have also been victims of Cosby to testify. The first time the trial went, the judge only allowed 1 other woman to testify who claimed that she had been a victim similar to the woman who was the center of this particular case. And so there's going to be an appeal, I'm sure. And so how the appellate court addresses the judges allowing 5 other women to testify is something to me that's of great interest.
Would you be of the mindset then that his biggest grounds for appeal would be that fact that the other women were allowed to testify then?
Yes, there will probably be other, of course, obviously, like everybody else, most people listening, I wasn't there. And so I only know what I read in the papers and hear on television, but that will be probably the core issue on appeal. And typically, judges will not allow evidence of alleged other bad acts or crimes to be introduced into evidence. So in other words, the jury typically would not get to hear that information because I guess the general thinking is just because you may have done something at another time doesn't mean that you did it this particular time. And so therefore that kind of evidence doesn't get in. That's going to be a critical issue. And so, court watchers will be looking to see how that issue is briefed and how the appellate court decides.
And that's fascinating. But just for our people who are, the lay people or people who haven't followed this story as closely, basically what you're saying is that the basis for the appeal is that they allowed unsubstantiated claims from other individuals who were making accusations against Bill Cosby, and that could have, or that did, prejudice the jury and would have influenced their decision otherwise.
I think that's a fair way to put it. I don't know whether again, you're talking to a lawyer, and so we kind of focus on every word. I don't know whether the other claims are substantiated or unsubstantiated.
But they are the statute.
Whether they were or not, typically that kind of information doesn't find its way into the courtroom, and so the jury doesn't hear it. And of course, the thinking is that information would have made it easier for them to convict Bill Cosby, Mr. Cosby, for something that happened, I believe, sometime in 2004. So it'll be very interesting to see how it all shakes out.
Right, because you're basically saying that the testimony of those other women, because they haven't been proven and adjudicated in a court, are basically hearsay.
In layman's terms, I think that's a fair way to put it.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this because I think this is a more direct way to put it, or more legal way to put it. The information that was introduced by these other women was if it wasn't unsubstantiated, it was certainly out of statute.
Yep, and so that will be part of the issue that gets talked about on appeal is when did those other instances allegedly
when a case goes to appeals court, you're looking for errors that occurred at the lower court level so that you can overturn whatever the jury decision was.
That is a great way of putting it. If I didn't know any better, I think you were a lawyer yourself. But yes, that's exactly it. What the appellate court does is there's something called the record. The record is just the exhibits. The trial testimony is as transcribed by the court reporter, and the appellate court basically serves as a replay, acting as umpires to make a determination as to whether the balls and strikes or the calls made by the trial judge were proper or improper. In other words, should he have allowed some evidence in, or did the law require him to keep it out? And so they will look, and it's usually a 3-panel person and they will look to see whether the trial judge made significant or material errors, and if he did, in this case the judge was a he, if he did, then they can order a retrial.
Okay, so this is Atiba, and full disclosure, I'm not a lawyer. I do, however, have my
Sounded
GED.
like when I was worried about you taking my job. But anyway, go ahead.
So I'm going to cite here from an article I'm reading written by Eric Levinson for CNN. And this piece was just written today. And he says Bill Cosby may not spend any time in jail at all. And what he's basically saying is during the process of appeal that you've so eloquently laid out, that he could, that his lawyers could push for him to serve that time on appeal at home. And that ultimately he may not ever serve any time. Right.
So the defense lawyers will get two bites at the apple, and one, they will ask the trial judge to let Mr. Cosby stay out of jail during the pendency, as we would say it, of the appeal. The appeal could take 2-3 years, although sometimes they can fast track appeals, sometimes they get delayed. There are briefs that filed, so the defense will file a brief. Then and there'll be post-trial motions as well, meaning that there may be still some other issues that get raised in front of the trial judge. And so the appeal process could go on for, it may not even start for, 6 or 12 months. And the issue will be whether the judge will make Mr. Cosby go to jail during the pendency of the appeal. Even if the trial judge says you have to go to jail, the appellate court could say, no, he doesn't have to go to jail. We're going to let him, stay out during the pendency of the appeal. So that question will come up twice. As a matter of fact, I had that very same issue happen in the E2 case, where the trial judge ruled against, I had the club owner rule against him. They were about to put him in handcuffs and take him away. And then I have to remember whether it was the trial judge or the appellate court that ruled that he could stay out pending the appeal. So, fortunately for us, Mr. Kyles was his name, never had to go to jail during the pendency of the appeal. So it very well could be that Bill Cosby does not go to jail, at least during the time that the appeal is pending. And of course, if he prevails on appeal, then he may not go at all.
Well, I'm looking at this piece now, and they kind of get into the mindset of the judge. His name is Stephen T. O'Neill. And on Thursday, O'Neill dismissed the prosecution to revoke Cosby's $1 million bail and remand him to jail. The judge is quoted as saying, I'm not simply going to lock him up right now, citing his age and his track record of appearing at every hearing for the past 2.5 years. The judge is also quoted as saying, you're making a very big deal of something where there's a very high bail, and he has appeared at every appearance, end quote. So it sounds like right now that the judge is not of that mindset.
Well, I will tell you this. If it wasn't what I call a high-profile media case, and if it was a regular case, the odds are probably 85 to 90%, if not higher, that the defendant would go to jail, especially in state court cases. In state court cases, typically, here in Illinois, for example, if you're found guilty, they sweep you off the floor. They take you right then and there. In federal cases, depending on the nature of the crime, they actually will allow you to remain out until the sentencing. And then even after your sentence, you typically don't go right away. You get to turn yourself in. And so the judge does have the discretion to let him stay out or keep him in. I will tell you because, judges are human beings like everybody else. I mean, we tend to think of the law as being rigid and black and white, but there are some judges who would have put Mr. Cosby in jail, and there are others who would let him stay out. Sometimes for reasons that make sense to us, and other times for reasons that are not readily apparent. Maybe he just doesn't want to be the guy to put Bill Cosby in jail. Maybe he thinks he has some legitimate appeal issues. Maybe he feels as if the mere fact that he has been adjudicated guilty is enough of a punishment for now. Some lawyers will say that the judge doesn't want to put himself in the hot seat any further, and so he'll let the appellate court make that decision about whether or not Cosby has to turn himself in. So there could be all kinds of reasons that the judge might say or might not say, which speak to why he will conceivably get to stay out during the pendency of the appeal.
This is David again, and I appreciate you going to the depths that you're going. But here's the question that I have, and this is the danger or the potential danger that I see. I'd love to hear your opinion. When you take the confluence of this case and the Me Too movement, there seems to be this big movement across the country to repeal the statute of limitations on cases like this, meaning that anyone can come out for any length of time and can assert or take someone to court for these types of charges. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Am I anticipating, or am I mischaracterizing, or is this nothing to worry about? Should I just feel like, hey, if you don't do anything wrong, you don't have to worry about a statute of limitations? Could you comment on the statute of limitations and what part they play, and the danger or lack of danger of repealing the statute of limitations for cases such as this?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think that's really a very interesting issue. The statute of limitations ultimately is determined by each state, and so here in Illinois, the legislature down in Springfield would determine what the statute of limitations is for a particular crime. The statute of limitations tends to be similar, but they're not exactly the same from state to state. The reason why you have a statute of limitations, in other words, if you have a claim, then you have to bring it within a certain period of time. And if you don't, then you lose it. And that's the general rule. Of course, there are exceptions. The rationale behind the rule is, witnesses die, documents get lost, people move. And so it's really a rule that's designed to try to keep evidence available and fresh so that it can be used. And of course, as we know, the longer it goes such that as a claim, the harder it is to prove. And some people would say that you shouldn't put a defendant through that. In other words, if you got your claim, bring it. If not, you're going to lose it. And so, but then again, on the other hand, and this is what lawyers do, you argue both sides. Some crimes are so egregious that people delay sometimes bringing them for all sorts of reasons. They're afraid, they're embarrassed, they didn't know that they have the right. And then there are cases like, for example, right here in Illinois, the statute can be used to protect actual guilty people. One of the cases I'm very interested in, the phenomenon I'm interested in, is police officers who tortured Black men, right here in Chicago. And as most of us know, not one of the people who was connected to John Burge wound up doing any jail time, in part because of the statute of limitations. So you have police officers who lied about what they did. The system didn't get them, and the statute has run. And so you have people who are guilty, but they don't have to go.
And as I hear, and as I was listening to you, it's amazing, because as soon as you switch to the police, the way I was processing what you were saying. And you said that the person might be embarrassed or they might be ignorant. I was initially feeling, well, I shouldn't have to defend myself against something that happened 20 years ago because someone was embarrassed and or ignorant of the law. But then when you switched it over to the police, and now you're talking about an institution, I believe it would be very appropriate to lift the statute of limitations for an institution because of the egregious nature of the example, like the Chicago Police Department. But again, I know the law doesn't necessarily make that distinction, but is it right for me to categorize individual culpability and institutional culpability as it pertains to the statute of limitations?
No, I mean, I think that's a fair way to draw a distinction, but ultimately it's the people who we elect. And, I digress for a moment, but I think it's critical for all of us to vote, to make sure that we're voting for people who will, enact statutes in a way that we think is fair. And one of the dangers for all of us is that when people don't vote, you don't get jurors who will necessarily see the world the way, a plaintiff or a defendant might see it. You don't get judges on the bench who'll see the world the way a plaintiff or defendant might say it. And so I think what you're saying is absolutely right. In some situations, like, hey, there should be a statute of limitations and it should be, fair or short. And then in another situation, you might be like, well, hey, there shouldn't be a statute of limitations because if people are guilty, then you should be tried. It doesn't matter when it is. And that's, especially as a civil rights lawyer for anybody who did something, who tortured a black man, for example, or a black woman or a white man or a white woman. I don't think that you should be able to hide by the statute of limitations and forever go free. So I think it depends on the situation, and you may find yourself arguing for a statute in one situation and arguing against it in another. But we have to be, in theory, try to be fair and play it down the middle and try to be consistent.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we do currently, is that we argue it for some things and not others. There is no statute of limitations on murder, for instance, because we've agreed that crime is as such that it should not matter how much time, expires before you're able to be prosecuted for it. So, that's something that we're already doing. We just have to do it more smartly as it pertains to these types of issues. So we thank you for that clarification. Now that we've opened up, because David, you did it, you opened up Pandora's box. So now that we're talking about cops, we've kind of transitioned away from Cosby just a little bit, but I have to ask you this now that I have you here, especially as an attorney. So I'm sure you're aware then of the gentleman that was shot in Sacramento, Stephen Clark, who was shot in his backyard with a cell phone, and the cops said they thought it was a gun, and it turns out in his autopsy, of the 8 times that he was hit, 6 times was in the back. Are you aware of that case in general?
I am. I know about it generally. I don't know all the specifics, but yes, I do know about it.
Well, I'm not going to get too specific into the case. There's a dynamic that I want to ask you about. So, per Sean King, who does a lot of work with civil rights, and especially as it pertains to police brutality, he at The Intercept, they came across information that indicated that the district attorney that is declining to bring charges has received over $420,000 from law enforcement groups. And so the dynamic I want to talk about now that we have you is simply this: how is it possible for a district attorney to be able to prosecute someone or to fairly investigate someone that they're receiving money, substantial amounts of money from? And then what is it we can do? What is it, in your opinion, we should do about that system so that we're able to get a more fair evaluation when we have these police involved shootings?
Well, I have handled more police involved shootings than I can count. I have mothers in my office every day crying, that they want justice for their children. Whether, cases in Chicago, cases downstate. I handle, cases, in multiple jurisdictions. I think the most important thing, and this is something that I don't think as citizens, especially people of color, have really embraced, it is critical for every person, especially people in communities where they're concerned about police shootings, to register to vote. And I said it for 2 reasons. One, when you don't vote, you are not eligible to serve on the jury. And there are different types of people who serve on juries, including the types who believe that police officers never lie. And then you have people who say, well, no, in my neighborhood, I see police, be disrespectful and lie, and so therefore I can believe it. The same thing was true for the type of judge. If you have a black man on a judge and there's a black defendant in front of him and he has to sentence him, who does that black judge see? Does he see his son? Does he see his nephew? Does he see a cousin? Whereas if a white man is sitting on the bench and going to sentence that same young black man, who does he see? Somebody who robbed him, somebody who cuts his grass, who does he see? And so as it relates to the case in Sacramento or locally, when you have a district attorney who takes money, or a prosecutor who takes money from law enforcement groups, I mean, you have that same situation in Chicago. Who does the Fraternal Order of Police? Who do they support? Who does Black Lives Matter support? I think all of that information should be out on the table. And then, of course, what's the old expression? He who pays the piper calls the tune. Of course, it's reasonable to think that if someone gives you money, that you're going to be more inclined to see things the way they want them, see the way that the people who give you the money see them. I mean, that's not an unreasonable thing. You have that with the NRA. And so, instead of, I think it's okay to complain that you see someone take money from a group that they favor, but I think it's more effective to protest with your vote and with your own money to try to level the playing field.
It's really interesting that you made that comparison about, or you made that statement about who the judge sees, and it's based on their own life experience and on their perception. Because
Exactly.
I've said that a bunch of times.
I thought justice was blind. What are you talking about?
No. But again, that takes me to a deeper point, because in your scenario, your scenario that you just set up jumps to when the judge intervenes in the case. But before a judge can actually, give a sentence or render a judgment, a jury has to actually, determine guilt or innocence. And oftentimes, when you have a jury that is predominantly from the majority population, they bring their personal biases into the system. So I guess I'm saying that to say that in all of the conversations that we have now that are going on nationally about criminal justice reform, we can lower sentences or try to inject some equity into how sentences are applied across the line, or take away discretion from judges. But ultimately, if the jury members are going to bring their own personal biases into when they have to render a decision, and to your point, when they see a white person, they see their father, their brother, their nephew. But when they see a person of color, they see the person who they saw on the news, or they see the person who cuts their grass. Until we can fix that, the criminal justice system is going to continue to disproportionately incarcerate people of color. Where am I wrong there?
I agree with you, but I want to add one thing. I think the way we fix it is to make sure that we participate, as opposed to just sitting on the sidelines and complain.
Agreed.
And I think part of our, if I could wave a magic wand, everybody who's a person of color would vote. If I could wave a magic wand, everybody who's a person of color would participate in, when you get the
jury
card in the mail that says you need to, go to jury duty, that we would all be there.
But I would even take it a step further, and this to me very plainly would expose the hypocrisy and the wanton or subconscious knowledge of the majority. If you went to every white person and told them, hey, we're going to give you a free trial, or we're going to give you a fair trial, you're going to be tried by a justice of your peers, the jury box has to be filled with all minorities. I wonder how white people, or how the majority would respond if the dynamic was changed. Because even to your point, African Americans and people of color can participate in jury, and go to jury duty. But as an attorney, that oftentimes based on the race of the person who's being tried during the voir dire process, if you've got a black person up there and you're the prosecution.
Wait, are you sure you're not a lawyer? Wait. You're a closet lawyer here.
No, but again, to my point, during that selection process, if an attorney, if the prosecution knows they have a black person who's being tried for X, they're going to try and dismiss as many of the black potential jurors in the pool, because they're going to perceive, a black jury is going to be sympathetic to a black person on trial. So even the voir dire process, when you're going through that and picking jurors, allows for the attorneys to introduce the biases,
some degree of discrimination,
and to make sure that they are packing the jury with a demographic of people who are going to rule more closely to whatever it is they're trying to accomplish?
Well, I'm going to agree and disagree, but let me tell you why. What I have learned through my own experience is we can't even put all Black people or white people in a box. And again,
Certainly
it's not a secret, so I'm going to put it out there. From my experience, I can't speak about anybody else's, but if I have an opportunity, it's a police shooting case to get a Black person from, let's say, the South Side or the West Side. That's different than getting maybe a Black person who lives out in Romeoville.
Hey.
You know, or Kane County. My point is
certainly. Agreed.
Not all Black people necessarily, think the same. If I have a choice between, depending on the case, and I've had them both sides, sometimes I have a case where I want what I perceive to be liberal jurors. And so Chicago, I'd rather have a white person from Chicago than a white person from, Kendall County. But then sometimes, I might want to have a white liberal person. So you're looking at their education, you're looking at their background, you're looking at their neighborhoods. I mean, certain neighborhoods in Chicago are viewed as being liberal.
But let me, and again, I'm
Lincoln Park. Then there are others that are viewed as less liberal. I won't name them. But you just have to keep your eyes and ears open, and you never know what you're going to.
After that, there's some monolithic way that you can predict that how a person is going to adjudicate a case as a juror based solely on their race or their gender or what have you. But you're kind of illustrating my point that you're getting so granular into how you select or deselect someone who's going to participate as a juror, and that selection process in of itself seems to lend itself to not necessarily getting impartial people who are going to just be picked based solely on the only prerequisite that you really have to be a juror, which is to be an American citizen.
Right. But you know what? So I'll say this again. First of all, so let me say a couple things. First, we all have biases. And so then the issue is trying to ferret out what are the person's biases. And then the second thing is how strong are their biases? And so what you wind up, because anybody who tells you they don't have biases is either not in touch with themselves or they're just lying. Then there's some people who may be a little biased versus a medium level of bias or a high level of bias, on any given issue. This is not something that I was familiar with, but there are actually cases where police officers have walked in and shot dogs. Well, if you have a case like that, for people who are pet owners, they know that the dogs are like family members. And if you don't have dogs, then maybe, or pets, you really can't relate. So you're always trying to look for people who, see the world the way you think your client sees it. And I do think that race on one level, you're thinking that Black people will be with you. And that's not an unreasonable assumption to make, at least initially. But then you will find out that there maybe is a grandmother who lives on a block where there's some, people who are involved in gangs, and she ain't feeling it. And so she may be the first person to say, hey, this guy's got to go, when in fact he might not be guilty. So so again, race is, I think, for most of us, including me, a dividing line where you think you're going to get a fair shot, and you hope you're going to get a fair shot, but it doesn't always turn out to be that way.
Agreed.
Attorney Henderson, we could have this fascinating conversation in full hour. I swear to God, I got like 6 more questions, but we do have to wrap it up. I do want to give you an opportunity before you leave to do 2 things. One, give us a prediction as to whether or not Bill Cosby will actually serve jail time, and if so, how much do you think? And then lastly, of course, I want to give you the opportunity to tell our listeners how they can follow you and follow your work.
Well, my gut is that my instinct tells me that they will let him stay out on appeal. I think a lot of people will scream and holler about that. But, the judge could have already put him in. And just in terms of following me and my work, there's as long as you don't try to steal my cases and my clients, throwing all these legal terms around. I have, quite a few cases that are in the news right now. I'm representing Black people at the Chicago Water Department who were, I'm just going to keep it real, called niggas and treated poorly. We have cases, where mothers have lost their children. We're defending people. So, we're in the news quite often. And, if and when somebody needs a good lawyer, we're at the Cochran firm in Chicago. Give us a call.
Well, we appreciate having you. And certainly, let me say we appreciate your work, Dave. Go ahead and get a second in. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, fascinating conversation. I look forward to having you back on because it's refreshing to have a conversation with an African American attorney who has gotten their knuckles bloodied defending our people.
I wouldn't have it any other way. It's in my heart.
And just so you know, I'm literally from Romeoville.
I did my homework before I got
right.
So basically, he's letting you know if you ever show up for jury duty during the voir dire, you getting out.
Right.
You're not.
You might get tossed.
Oh, get him out of here. Attorney Henderson, we thank you so much for being on today. Please continue to be a friend of the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely.
We had a comment from Terry Connor. She said, "That's the reason I don't fully buy into the notion that it's all about voting or making sure that you show up for jury duty. The odds are stacked for sure. The climate of the world has shifted, but I'll take my chances with a predominantly Black jury."
Excellent comment. We thank you, Ms. Connor, for taking the time to listen and certainly taking the time to participate. Everybody listening, follow Terry. Participate, send a comment. As you can see, we'll be happy to read it live on air. If it's a question, we'll be happy to answer it if we can. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to discuss Black Hollywood, or the lack thereof, on Humanity in the Headlines on IntellectualRadio.com.
We're back on Intellectual Radio. You are listening to Humanity in the Headlines. You know what? You saw Black Panther.
I did.
Excellent movie. I would say that I think it would be fair to say that most African Americans, when they went to go see that movie and they left that movie, it gave them a sense of pride. It gave them a sense of
Wakanda forever.
Wakanda forever.
Right.
Yeah, do that. Wakanda forever. So excellent movie, and one of the reasons why African Americans were particularly proud of this movie is for two reasons. Number one, this is the first major superhero film that was predominantly had all Black actors. As a matter of fact, as I recall, there was only one white character in the movie who was there throughout.
Two.
There were two.
There was two. Well, Claw got killed.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Most of the movie was full of Black people. So that was something that was new, and that this was a Black superhero. So for those of you who don't follow the Marvel comic universe or what have you, Black Panther is a significant contributor to that universe. So to see him brought on screen in this movie that was surrounded about him and his story, and that the story was based out of Africa, was, again, that was a compelling story. It gave a lot of Black people senses of pride to see us be depicted in a positive way like that. And again, that's not to say that this was simply just a Black movie, because obviously, the movie has been well received. It's made over $1.3 billion worldwide. So a lot of people outside of African Americans had to support this movie in order for it to have the financial success that it has had.
And the character itself was created by Stan Lee.
Correct.
A white guy.
Correct. So again, even when you take that into context, that the comics of this movie dates back to the 60s when Stan Lee actually invented the character, and that we've had movies about so many superheroes, and for us to finally be to the point or get to the point where we could make a movie about a black superhero and for it to have the success that it has had really makes a point about how we have progressed, I believe, as a people, and how, and a lot of black people were saying, because this movie made so much money as a black film, that now we're going to completely have a different conversation about how black people are depicted in Hollywood, because the thinking before the success of Black Panther was, if you have an all black movie, it's not going to be successful. And it's definitely not going to be successful overseas, because people don't want to see that. People don't want to see a movie with a bunch of black people on it. So the success of this movie, I believed, elevated the perception of African Americans in Hollywood, that we can make black movies that are financially successful, and it gave a positive depiction of black people. Now we turn around and because Black Panther is still in the movie theaters, it's still making money. While Black Panther is still in the movie theaters, we have a television show, and we have another movie coming out. One movie starring Tiffany Haddish and Kevin Hart called Night School. The premise of the movie is that Kevin Hart is this successful salesperson. I forget what he sells. I think he's like working in like a Home Depot where he's selling grills or something. And he has a Caucasian friend who works in a financial district, and he's trying to, he's a really good salesman. So he wants to go into this white collar job where he can be, he can take his skill set and be successful there. But the premise of the movie is he has to go back and get his GED. So let's put a pin right there. Then we have another television show coming out with Tiffany Haddish. Right. Tiffany Haddish apparently is all the hotness right now, which she is. Tracy Morgan. Tracy Morgan's character, the backdrop of the show is Tracy Morgan gets out of jail after 15 years. He comes back. He's trying to reintegrate into society. He's trying to hook back up with his I guess ex, Tiffany Haddish, and they had 2 children together. So he's trying to reestablish his relationship with his kids and with his ex. So the question now, and both of these movies are comedies. They're both comedic movies. So when I saw the trailers for those 2 movies, I guess the show with Tiffany Haddish and Tracy Morgan is on right now.
I think it just started.
Right. I have no intention of watching it. So when I saw that, just the juxtaposition of seeing the success and the way that African Americans specifically, but African culture generally, was lauded and elevated in this over $1 billion enterprise worldwide. And then to go right from that, and right on the heels of that, have 2 movies that exacerbate the negative stereotypes of African American men. One movie, the African American male's got a GED.
Less than a GED.
Right, doesn't even have a GED. He's going back to school to get his GED. So the one is the African American male who's charismatic and he's a good salesperson and can talk, but dropped out of high school. And the other guy just got out of jail for 15 years. So the question
well, hold on, cut you off, but you did put it as graciously as you can. As opposed to being charismatic, a lot of people would say slick.
Right. He's a good orator.
Right. Again, but that's not the stereotype. The stereotype is fast talking and slick.
Correct.
But go ahead.
Correct. So when I saw that, I just had a moment of cognitive dissonance, because to come off of the heels. Now, again, understanding how movies work and understanding the filming process and how films go from being greenlit and piloted and filmed and then coming to market, these movies were obviously in the pipeline well before, or probably at the same time that Black Panther was being filmed. But the larger question that I can't seem to reconcile is, or the question that we need to ask ourselves is, why is it that Hollywood, when they depict African Americans and African American men specifically, they return to these stereotypical depictions of black men, high school dropouts,
Ex-con,
ex-cons,
thug,
thug, ne'er-do-wells,
rapper.
miscreants, rappers. As an actor and as a comedian. So I even have a question, and again, I would again kind of understand the business aspect of it. Someone partnered Tiffany Haddish and Kevin Hart together because she's on the upswing, so they're trying to give a little, boost to her career. So for her to hook up with both Kevin Hart and with Tracy Morgan right now is more, probably says more about Tiffany Haddish than it does about either one of them. I just question that, like I said, these it's 2018. We still have these tired stereotypes of African American men. Tiffany Connor said, "Have you all heard about the 5 black women golfers in Pennsylvania that had the police called on them for golfing?" Yeah, saw that too. And and then she just commented, "They keep depicting black men this way because they keep accepting the roles." Interesting point, because I was about to say that. Kevin Hart's career is at the point where he could turn this, he could say, "No, I'm not doing that. I'm not playing that role." He's in the position where he can do that. He can pick and choose what roles he wants to take. So again, excellent point, Terry. What does that say about Kevin Hart? African American men do have a higher percentage of dropping out of high school as compared to all other men in the United States. So that's true, but it's not it's not an exceedingly high number. It's like I said,
Nor is it a number that represents all African Americans, and that's unfortunately. So here's what you're talking about. What you're talking about then is now dealing with the fallout of the perception of what these people see in these limited doses of blackness that they get. They get a few minutes of blackness in the news because we're overrepresented in negative things in the news. They get a little dose of blackness in the media, and the little bit that they do get as as people that are inconsequential in the movie, or as people that when they are consequential have again only fit a certain stereotype. Things have been pervaded in this country for years, and then we have fallout from that. So we have situations where we have people like in China, and I'm reading this from Quartz. There's a quote there when Black Panther came out saying, it's a quote, torture for the eyes. Chinese moviegoers think Black Panther is just too black. People literally are just not accustomed to seeing that much blackness, even operating in the wonderful excellence that Black Panther operates in. We have women on planes that are told, "You can't be the doctor. You're black, lady. Get out of here. We called for a real doctor. What are you doing?" So when those things happen to African Americans and minorities every day. People are totally comfortable with seeing minorities in the roles that they're used to seeing them in. Cutting the grass, as we mentioned earlier, being security. For whatever the reason, it's just great to have black people in security wherever you go. Like that's always a black security guard at every high school. They're like, what is with that? It's okay for people of a minority culture to do the things that they associate with their culture. It's okay for Hispanics to be in your neighborhood as long as they are operating a taco place, and a good taco place. But if that same Hispanic community wants to open a business that does financial consulting, who's going to go there? And Hollywood plays a big part as to how people perceive other people. And I agree with you that we have, to me, that's why this conversation is important.
Well, and again, and the success of Black Panther. And again, I don't want to make this necessarily about, like coming off like some kind of comic book nerd, because I'm not. But the success of that movie should be demonstrable, should demonstrate to Black people that we can, with the power of our pocketbooks, we can control and we can direct how we are depicted. If then Hollywood will, because at the end of the day, regardless of the biases that people have in any particular industry, the bottom line is that they are motivated by money. So we have to, as African Americans, start taking control of the ways that we are depicted, the ways that we are treated, where we live, everything. We have to start controlling that with our pocketbooks. And I would go so far as to say that the power of the pocketbook is even more important than protesting and marching and a lot of the other things that we've grown accustomed to doing. Because again, the people that we're protesting against, they know all they have to do is sit back, wait for it to die down, and they can go back to their same MO. We've got to start corralling our economic power to influence the culture in a positive way as it pertains to the way that we are depicted and treated.
I could go on with you, but I'm gonna have to leave it right there as we come to the end of the hour. And I think that's actually an excellent way to end the show. To always give our listeners a mission, and again, the power of our dollar. We have to exercise the powers that we have, and you've heard throughout this show today: vote, participate, and now influence and control with your dollar. We're going to have to leave it there. But
shout out to Terry Connor for the comments today. Love absolutely. That. Also, shout out to Felicia Ingram checking us out today. Haven't seen you in a minute. Thanks for checking us out today.
Yeah, absolutely. We thank you guys for participating. All of our listeners on IntellectualRadio.com and YouTube and Facebook Live, we thank you so much for joining us.
I see you too, Mary Johnson. Thank you for watching today, too. Share the show.
Yeah, I was going to say, please feel free to share the show. You think of anyone that may benefit or just anyone. And just trust and know that we will be back next week to do it all over again, 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. We want to thank our producer, Mr. Breon Jones, and we want to thank our guest today, Attorney Victor Henderson. He was a great
guest today.
Yeah, he was amazing. If you definitely want to catch that conversation, if you did not catch it earlier, I will be posting the show in its entirety today on Facebook. So once you get that, please, again, feel free to listen and feel free to share and feel free to support. We thank you so much for listening to Humanity in the Headlines. You guys have a blessed week, and we'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Take care.